Before I introduce today's presenter, I want to thank United Insurance for sponsoring today's webinar, particularly two Black Bears with their own Aroostook County connections. One is Todd Saucier. He's the Vice President of United Insurance and the organization's agency manager in Presque Isle. And the other is Travis Duval, the agency manager in Fort Kent. So thank you to United Insurance for their support of the Alumni Association and particularly this webinar today. Today's speaker is Catherine Olmstead. Kathy, as many people know her. Her name is familiar to many in the state for several reasons. She was a longtime faculty member at the University of Maine's journalism department and was an associate dean of the University of Maine's College of Liberal Arts. She was also the editor and co-founder of Echoes magazine, which highlighted and celebrated life in northern Maine. And she was a popular and longtime columnist for the Bangor Daily News. She's also the author of True North, Finding the Essence of Aroostook, and that is a collection of essays that was published in 2020 by Island Port Press. And I do want to note that in 2018, she was inducted into the Maine Press Association's Hall of Fame. Quite an honor. But before we begin, I do want to let those of you watching this webinar in real time, because it is available or will be available when we put it up on the website on demand. But if you're watching in real time, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of Kathy during the Q&A section of today's program. And to do that, all you have to do is click on the little chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That's the cartoon speaking bubble that we're familiar with. Type your question in there and then hit the return or enter key on your computer. All right. And I do want to note that Kathy's book is available at Island Port Press website, and we'll show that information later in the program. And it's also available on Amazon and at other bookstores in the state. So with that, I'd like to welcome Kathy. Thank you so much for joining us. Your book is about Aroostook County, but you're not a native Aroostook County person, though, although a lot of people assume you are. Can you tell us what brought you to Maine and in particular to Aroostook County?
Well, of course. So first, I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I've seen enough of these webinars to know that I'm in good company, and I am honored to be among those people who have presented before, and thank you very much. But what brought me to Aroostook County is, I would guess, chance. I was married to a second-generation Swede at the time and living in New Hampshire. We had spent time in Sweden and we're on a vacation in Quebec from New Hampshire and decided to return through Maine. We saw the sign that said Stockholm as we were traveling south. And then we said, oh, that's interesting. And then we saw a sign that said New Sweden. And by that time we said, well, we're just gonna have to stop and buy a postcard and send it to your father, who was even a super Swede. So we did that. And of course, when we went to the post office to put this in the mail, we got to chatting with the postmaster, and he said, well, there is a couple that used to come out here, that has been coming out here from Illinois for years, and they went to the same college as my husband. So long story short, we found these people and ended up spending the night. We went on a dinner potluck with friends. People were wonderful. The next day we had a tour of the area. We were taken with the beauty and with the people, as well as the fact that we were ready for a sort of a lifestyle change. We were looking towards being more sustainable and seeing if we could live off the land and grow a garden. And this place captured our imagination. So does that answer the question enough?
Oh, that's great. So what did you know about the county before you got there? What was it all? Did you have any background before you made the trip up?
Zero. No, until that first visit, we knew nothing. And then we passed a house on a suburb of New Sweden called Westmanland, and hadn't been lived in for 17 years, was occupied by porcupines. And we said, this is it. We're going to have this as our dream house, and figured out who owned it and traveled back and forth through that next year, and eventually acquired a 60-acre farm and the house, so that we became acquainted as we purchased the property, and traveled back and forth from New Hampshire until we ended up moving.
Then you become probably one of the highest profile chroniclers of Aroostook life in the last, what, 50 years? Is it?
Not quite that long, but almost.
Yeah, that's wonderful. All right. So when did you start writing about the county?
Immediately. I was a correspondent for the Bangor Daily News back when they had 3 bureaus in Aroostook County: Holton, Presque Isle, and Madawaska. And I worked out of the Presque Isle Bureau for a no-nonsense journalist with a big heart named Dean Rhodes. And so I did the typical cops and courts and municipal government and events and so forth. But I could also write feature stories on anything I wanted to. So whenever I saw something interesting, I did a feature, and they published them all, and I got paid for it. I mean, what could be better? So that was my first exposure. And then when I got divorced, I had to get a full-time job. So I worked at the weekly newspaper in Caribou, the Aroostook Republican, and eventually became the editor. And then also worked as a correspondent for 2 agricultural newspapers, one in Kansas and one in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. One was called The Packer, and the other was New England Farmer. One was a weekly and one was a monthly. So I did a lot of agricultural reporting through those 2 publications.
Then your writing also expanded a bit into the founding of Echoes magazine. When did that happen? And tell us about how that came to be.
Well, that happened in 1988. The first Echoes magazine was a brochure. It was created by a man who had a career in advertising and marketing in New York and Boston, and decided to move to northern Maine to also go back to the land and live more sustainably. His name is Gordon Hammond, and he had decided once he got to northern Maine that he could use his skills in advertising and marketing to help Aroostook County and help the development and tourism and so forth. So he got the Chambers of Commerce together to produce this brochure, but he used a magazine format. And we met at the time that he was trying to figure out what to do, because people were asking if they could subscribe to this magazine, because it was in the magazine format. So we met, and we had the same dream. I had had a dream when I lived in Aroostook, and by this time I was in Orono, of starting a magazine called Up North, which would be the counterpart to Down East. And I had gotten together with another news reporter, and we were thinking we would do this, but of course we had no money. And we had the idea, well, he had no money either, but he was more courageous than me. So we got together and decided that we would see if we could publish a pilot edition. So we got the mailing list from the weekly newspapers and sent out postcards to the subscribers saying you can be the charter member of a new magazine published quarterly. And if you subscribe for a year, you'll get this premier edition. So we turned the first edition, the brochure, into a premier premium to lure subscribers. And it took off, really took on a life of its own. And the idea, and Gordon was a person who was dedicated to the idea that qualities of rural culture have a message for the future, that some of these traditions are worth exploring and celebrating to solve some of the problems that we have in today's society.
But we'll want to follow up with you on that after we hear you share some of the stories from the book, some of the essays from the book. But first I want to ask you, obviously your book, True North, contains a lot of essays about life in Aroostook County, but it doesn't include everything that you ever wrote for the BDN or for Echoes about Aroostook County. It must have been a pretty daunting process to go through and decide which ones to include and which ones to set aside. How did you go through that process? What were the criteria you were looking at for coming up with the right mix?
Good question. I would say probably one of the key filters for choosing the essays was timelessness. Didn't want dated ones, and those that were the best, what I thought were the best portrayal of Aroostook County, the essence of Aroostook. I obviously wanted to choose the ones that were most popular, especially those that generated a lot of response from the Bangor Daily columns. So popularity was one thing, and variety in topic and variety in style, both serious ideas and humor. And that's why I grouped them into those themes that that you see in the table of contents. Typically Aroostook, things that were typically Aroostook, living with wildlife. Some of those essays were the most popular in the Bangor Daily. High on the land, which was just my feeling for a connection to nature. Deep roots is the heritage, because I was so impressed with the heritage of Aroostook County. And then finally county people, which I added actually after I'd submitted the manuscript. And so that was it. I think those are the things. Basically timeliness, best portrayal of the county, things that were popular, and a variety of topics and styles, writing styles.
Well, one of the essays that you have in there that I think is a good one for us to start with in terms of having you share excerpts of is your essay called Heritage Envy. And I think a lot of people who are Aroostook County wannabes, people who love the county and wish that they had the formal connections with it, really can appreciate. Would you share with us excerpts from Heritage Envy? And I think we have some images that we'll be able to share that accompany that piece as well.
Sure. This is the beginning and the end. Living in Aroostook County has given me a kind of heritage envy. I'm sure my ancestors had compelling narratives of the hardships they endured in coming to a strange land, but they arrived so long ago, their stories have been lost. Descendants of immigrants to northern Maine and adjacent New Brunswick, however, know their roots, especially the Acadians and the Swedes. Tales of their migrations to the region are told and retold, strengthening the cultural heritage with each retelling, affirming for each family and individual an identity in their ethnic history. My sense of separateness resurfaced when I read in a brochure that I am scheduled to talk to a downstate historical society about growing up in a Swedish community. This came as a surprise, since I grew up in a non-ethnic suburb of Battle Creek, Michigan. But there was in print for all to anticipate. Maybe I could pull it off. Certainly I masqueraded as a Swede at many a midsummer festival during the 10 years that I lived in Westmanland, a suburb of New Sweden, dancing in traditional costume and helping serve at smorgasbords. Maybe I should talk about how I became a pseudo-Swede. Perhaps I could interview people who did grow up in a Swedish community, or relate all that I learned about Maine's Swedish colony after I was welcomed into their community as a transplant. Northern Maine's Swedish colony has one of the most well-documented migrant histories in the state, beautifully portrayed in the New Sweden Historical Museum. Residents celebrate not only the annual Midsummer Festival in June, but also the anniversary of the colony's founding in July, the pre-Christmas Santa Lucia Festival in December, and Julata on Christmas morning. These celebrations continually renew the history of the Maine colony and the traditions of the old country, educating all generations of Swedes and non-Swedes. To live in the community is to know something about Swedish culture. I was proud to don the costume of the Swedish province for which Westmanland was named. I loved learning and performing traditional dances and speaking what few Swedish words I could with those who understood them. So while I couldn't tell the Historical Society about growing up in a Swedish community, I could certainly describe growing into one. And if anyone thinks I'm really Swedish, I'd consider it a compliment.
Very good. Thank you so much. You mentioned that that essay and others are all organized thematically in 5 themes of that. And one of those themes is living with wildlife. And you have an essay in there that's called Alone. And I emphasize my inflection is deliberate because in the book it's alone with a question mark there. Would you share that? Because that's a piece that seemed to reflect your, I want to say, inculcation into life living in a remote area, especially extremely remote in Aroostook County in Westmoreland.
This truly reflects about an hour of my life on a hill in Westmoreland, which is about 15 miles north of Caribou. It is cold, almost midnight. I carve a chair into the snowbank beside the driveway and line it with the tough wool blanket I carry in the trunk of my car in the winter. Wrapped in my warmest down coat, I take my seat to view this evening's display of northern lights. The pulsing flares of yellow, then red, then green, in an arc across the northern sky, seem to evoke the cries of the coyotes that echo in the valley below. First one, then a chorus of barks and howls alternate in a pattern that is the perfect accompaniment to nature's performance above. Originally, I came out to look at the comet that had followed me home on the long drive north to Westmoreland, drawing my attention from Interstate 95 to the darkening sky outside the left window of my car. By the time I had unloaded the car, built a fire, and returned to the yard to examine the night sky, Aurora Borealis had become the main attraction, with the comet performing a sideshow. I leaned back, arms outstretched, head resting on the snow. Diminished by their luminous competition, the stars still seem close. Everything seems close. I am enfolded, a part of all that surrounds me. Beneath the hill that rises behind me, a fox family lives in a den with 3 entrances. We share the same trails all winter, and when spring arrives, the field beneath this snow becomes a playground for bouncing gray kits that cavort in the grass under close parental supervision. In June, moose escape into this field from the black flies in the woods, traipsing through the garden, past the house, and up over the back hill into New Sweden. Once I watched a mother nurse her calf in a clearing visible from the kitchen window where I view the animals that share this land. A portrait of maternal contentment for perhaps half an hour. Suddenly she stiffened and led her baby gracefully across the hill back into the woods. The next time I looked out the window, a black bear was grazing in the clearing. Seated at the base of the slope, I feel the chill as Aurora Borealis fades and the coyote calls cease. I roll up my blanket and head into the warmth of the fire. Sometimes people ask, how can you live up on that hill all alone? Well, it's hard to explain.
Beautiful, thanks. I love your prose. How does your experience living in Aroostook County, especially when you were living in Westmoreland, compare to when you lived in New Hampshire, another rural state? And I think you lived, even though you grew up outside of Battle Creek, I think you also lived in a more rural part of Michigan too. Is that correct?
Well, it was at the time. And that was a really good question. There is a difference. And I guess my memories of Michigan and New Hampshire are more of trees. I was, we were living in a place called Willard Woods, and my childhood was building forts and huts and trails and things in the woods. And in New Hampshire too, my memories are of trees. Aroostook is different, and it's the vastness and the darkness, I think, that makes it different. The sweeping landscapes, you drive up at the crest of a hill, you can see for miles. There's a place on I-95 just between Island Falls and Dyer Brook where right straight ahead at the other end of the highway is Mount Katahdin, and it's right there, right in the middle of the highway, and then it gradually disappears. And everybody probably who does that trip recognizes where I am describing. So I guess it's the cleared land that create this sense of of spaciousness and vastness, and then the night sky, that there is less light pollution here so that you can see the stars at night. I just love to go out in the night and be surrounded by the universe, which is rare.
Big sky country. Absolutely. In that same section of the book that Alone was in, there's another essay you have that deals with slugs and beer, slugs and suds. It was a wonderful piece that got a lot of attention, and particularly got attention on the NPR radio program, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Can you share that story with us and talk a little bit about the feedback you got after it got the notoriety when it was mentioned on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me?
Well, it actually got feedback before I was even on.
Oh, that's true.
But yeah, after I retired in 2009, I decided I was going to get back to the land again. I would try to recover some of those skills that I tried to acquire when we moved in the 70s. And gardening was one of them. And I'm not a natural gardener. I'm not one of those people who must get out and scratch in the dirt as soon as the frost leaves the ground. So I had some problems. And these are just a few excerpts from this long description of an experiment that I ran. And I'll just try to make it brief. My battle against garden slugs could tarnish my reputation in the community. Apparently, the slimy creatures who look like large snails without shells were breeding in the thick bed of straw that covered the garden last winter and became saturated with a month of rain in May. As soon as the tender sprouts spread their leaves, the slugs turned them into lace. Then I remembered someone telling me you could catch slugs with beer. I had a few bottles left over from a party, so I tried it. Sure enough, the critters crept into the foil pie pans of beer that I scattered between the rows of beans and squashes. I was willing to give up a few bottles of Corona, but when I drew the line when I was down to my nice Irish stout, I was going to have to buy beer, especially for the slugs. What brand do you suppose they would like? I didn't want to be stuck with a brand I'd never drink myself. So I settled on a 6-pack of Molson because it was on sale at Sleepers for $5.99. Well, they went through that in a week, and I was not about to return to Sleepers for another 6-pack so soon. I imagined the face of the cashier when I explained it was for my slugs. So I went to the supermarket and found a 40-ounce bottle of Budweiser for $2.99. Perfect. They loved it. I caught twice as many slugs with Bud as with either Corona or Molson. I actually watched a slug make its way past the seedlings toward a pan of beer. Now I was curious. Do they really prefer one brand over another? Was I willing to give up some of my imports for an experiment? Would slugs collect in a pan of, say, Guinness? So I cracked open one of my last 2 bottles of Guinness, telling myself it never tastes as good out of the bottle anyway. I wanted to use Budweiser as a control, but I could not find that 40-ounce bottle for $2.99. At the supermarket in Caribou, it was hard to find anything smaller than a 12-pack of Bud. I must have gone all the way to Presque Isle the first time in my search for anonymity. So I settled for a 6-pack of Moosehead. I poured pools of Guinness into 3 pie pans and Moosehead into 3 pie pans. There was a little left in each bottle, so I emptied them both into a 7th pan. Not really a black and tan, but close. So the experiment continues with different combinations of domestic and foreign beers, and the essay concludes, I can honestly say I have never bought so much beer in such a short span of time, nor been so conscious of the prices. And while I was able to scatter my purchases among the variety of grocery stores, I use only one recycling center, so my reputation might suffer when I return the empties. So this generated probably more responses than any other essay, and here are a few of them. Slugs drink Bud. I've known that for years. I wouldn't waste my money on Budweiser, even for a slug. I knew Budweiser was brewed with some other life form than Homo sapiens in mind. I applaud your perseverance in trying to maintain anonymity in your purchases. Your experience would have made a great 30-minute TV show. Budweiser is a foreign-owned company. Now it's about as domestic as Toyota. One reader noted that only Bud adds rice to the hops during fermenting and ages its beer in beechwood barrels. So he theorized that it could be the rice or the barrels or both that make Bud appealing to slugs. A writer for an online gardening magazine in New York interviewed me for an article about my experiment in her publication. And a person recommended a book titled The Sound of a Wild Slug Eating, and another person actually sent me a copy of a book titled 50 Ways to Kill a Slug. But as you mentioned, my favorite responses was it inspired a limerick on NPR's news show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I was in Canada when it aired in July of 2011, but I heard about it from friends all over the country. One of them even figured out how I could hear it and get a transcript. So here's what Peter Sagal, the host, said in explaining this event. Gardeners know slugs are attracted to beer, but only Catherine Olmstead, a writer and professor in Maine, bothered to ask which beer they prefer. She gave her garden slugs a selection of domestic and foreign beers, and the slugs overwhelmingly chose Budweiser. True fact. Except for one pretentious slug who's like, "Do you have any top fermented ales?" And the other slugs threw him out of the frat. Whatever they drink, though, those slugs, the party is over as soon as they reach for the salted nuts. And if you know the show, you know that the game of the limerick is for a participant who calls in to listen to 3 news-related limericks with the last word or phrase missing. Fill in the last word or phrase correctly on 2 of the 3 and you're a winner. So this was the first limerick read to a man who called in from Grand Isle, New York. For Anheuser-Busch, it's a plug. Shell-less mollusks consume with the glug. They think microbrews are a bit of a snooze. No, Bud is the beer for
Slug. There you go. We
Got
all
it.
said it in unison. Oh, that's just great. Wonderful. And do you know whether any other scientist, either credentialed or amateur, has tried to replicate your experiment, maybe with other beers or other type of wildlife?
No, I haven't. I was sure that we'd get some sort of response from Anheuser-Busch, but they haven't wanted to use this for one of their promotions.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it appeals, but it appeals to slimy creatures.
Yeah.
But we all know that. Okay, sorry, passing judgment there. Let's move on. You have another section of the book called Deep Roots, and there's an essay in there that talks about feeling Acadian, or that's the title of it. And that is something that I think that essay really distinguishes Northern Maine, especially the Valley, from the rest of Maine and New England. Would you share that essay or excerpts from that essay? And I think Aisha will be sharing some photos as well.
Sure. Many people know that the town of Van Buren, Maine, and the town of St. Leonard, New Brunswick were once one town called Grande Riviere. Family farms spanned the St. John River from one side to the other. Then in 1842, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty made the river the boundary between Canada and the United States. But the 2 towns retained that sense of community. They even have tug of wars across the St. John River, competing one service group against the other during special ceremonies. In 2014, the St. John Valley celebrated the World Acadian Congress, attracting thousands of visitors from French-speaking countries around the world. And I wanted to focus my stories for the Bangor Daily and for Echoes on how one town experienced this extraordinary event. I knew I couldn't cover the whole thing, so I just focused on one town, and Van Buren adopted me. And they saw to it that I was included in every part of the 7-day festival. That friendship that they extended to me seems to typify the spirit of Acadians throughout the St. John Valley and the message that the existence of the Acadian community represents. So here are a few excerpts from Feeling Acadian. I thought I understood what it means to be Acadian, but celebrating the World Acadian Congress, Congrès Mondial Acadien, with the town of Van Buren in 2014 moved my understanding from intellectual to the emotional and spiritual. Celebrated every 5 years in French-speaking countries around the world, the 2014 Acadian Congress was the first to be hosted by two countries, Canada and the United States, through collaboration by the provinces of Quebec and New Brunswick with the state of Maine. Van Buren was paired with two communities in Quebec as well as St. Leonard, New Brunswick. I could feel the pride among the hundreds of people gathered in the gymnasium at Van Buren High School for the launch of the weeks-long festival. I was welcomed to a table by women eager to share their secrets for variations on the ploys and cretonne included among the offerings for our hearty breakfast. We viewed the opening ceremonies projected on a big screen live from Quebec. Throughout the hall, people who had been punished for speaking French as children spoke their language freely and sang French songs joyfully. Music brought people together again on Sunday morning for a bilingual mass and concert by the combined choirs of the Van Buren and New Brunswick towns of St. Leonard and St. Anne. Every seat was filled in the Romanesque sanctuary of St. Bruno Church as songs in French rang from the choir loft high above the congregation. The Reverend Jacques Lapointe dedicated the service to refugees around the world. He said, like Acadians in 1755, refugees today, 2014, are being persecuted on a mountain in Iraq. We were supposed to disappear, but we survived because we reached out to others. Lapointe expressed hope that sometime in the future, today's refugees would be able to celebrate their survival with festivities like the World Acadian Congress. To proclaim their survival, Acadians make noise. They call it a tintamarre, and they march together, banging pans, blowing horns, and sounding every kind of noisemaker available to say, we are here. I was swept into Van Buren's tintamarre, marching down Main Street and across the International Bridge from Van Buren to St. Leonard, New Brunswick, where we were greeted by a cheering crowd and border officials steering us toward check-in windows. Like Mainers, New Brunswickers were decked out in Acadian red, white, blue, and yellow. They blended together, and that was the point. I was there because townspeople continued to reach out to me, demonstrating the generosity that meant survival for the Acadians in the 1700s. I will never be able to claim Acadian heritage, but I feel its strength, rooted in a history of persecution throughout the St. John Valley. I too hope that the suffering of the world's refugees today will end with a tintamarre.
Very nice, very nice. Just following up on that, how a lot of people during the pandemic have relocated to Aroostook County, and even though it's been very difficult for anybody to really get together to meet new people and difficult to reestablish relationships, have you found that the culture that you were just talking about there is being recognized or embraced yet by the people who have been relocating to the area, or has that been hampered by the fact that the public gatherings that have made up the community and have reinforced that have just not been happening?
I really don't know, because I haven't talked with those who have relocated. I would guess that they would experience the same kind of welcoming that I did. But I can't be sure. I really don't know. I know that there has been an influx and that the real estate is disappearing fast. But I really am sorry, but I haven't had the communication that would give me the answer to your question.
Well, thank you. There was another section of the book that I want us to get to before we get to the Q&A part of the program. And you have something that talks about the resilience and determination of county people. And you wrote about three Mainers who had some, early in their careers, had some disappointments that might have deterred them for pursuing their aspirations, but who overcame that and went on to even greater prominence. Would you share that essay with us? And I think Aisha may have some images to share with that as well.
Just a few. The title is Rewards for Resilience. When this article appeared in the Bangor Daily in 2013, it was about two people. And then when True North was published in 2020, it was time to add a third. And the theme is, I was curious, is it coincidence, or is there a reason that these people, and probably others, all from Caribou, failed to reach a goal, but then went on to either higher achievements than they had sought originally? The first image is of Jessica Meir as a child. It was taken probably in 1980, 81. I think she's about 3 or 4. Her mother is Swedish and she's sitting on her mother's lap, and her father is Israeli. And she was the beginning of this revised essay about rewards for resilience. Here's the beginning. When astronaut Jessica Meir spoke from the International Space Station to an assembly of students in Caribou, Maine in October of 2019, she exhibited a trait common among Caribou natives who have excelled in their careers. Meir had envisioned herself an astronaut since she was 5 years old. When her teacher asked the class, her first grade teacher, to draw what they wanted to be, she drew herself in a spacesuit standing on the moon. For her high school yearbook, she said her dream was to take a spacewalk. In 2009, after years of education and training, Meir was poised to see her dream come true. She was a finalist for the 20th class of astronauts chosen by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, but she was not selected. Resigned that her dream would go unfulfilled, she continued her education and research and accepted a position as assistant professor of anesthesia at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital. Then in 2013, she was encouraged to apply for the 21st class of astronauts at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Do I want to go through that again and have the same thing happen? She asked herself. But I knew I had to, she told the Caribou students, adding that she knew she would always question her decision if she did not reapply. As we all know, Jessica was one of 8 candidates selected from more than 6,100 qualified applicants for the 2013 class of astronauts. After 6 years of intensive training at the Johnson Space Center, she left Earth on September 25th, 2019, and in 7 hours boarded the International Space Station, 220 miles away. On October 18th, Meir not only fulfilled her dream of taking a spacewalk, but also made history as a member of the first and subsequently the second and third all-female spacewalks. When students at the assembly in Caribou had the opportunity to ask questions, middle school student Amelia Godin stepped to the microphone and asked, "How important was resiliency in helping you to overcome the disappointment of not being selected the first time you applied to NASA?" "It was very important," Meir responded. "It was a great lesson. You can't give up. Never be afraid to take a risk and fail. It might even bring you closer to what you want to do." Meir's words echoed those of the two other Caribou natives who defied defeat and tried again and attained leadership positions even higher than those that they originally sought. James H. Page wanted to be president of the University of Maine in 2011, but lost, only to become chancellor in 2012. Susan M. Collins wanted to be governor of Maine in 1994, but lost, only to become a U.S. senator in 1996 in 2002, in 2008, in 2014, and 2020. Commenting on their decisions to try again in separate interviews, incidentally, Page said, "The first experience gave me the impetus to go after the second. Being unsuccessful helped me be successful." Collins said, "Had I not taken the risk of losing, I would not be in the US Senate." Then I asked each of them if there was something in the Aroostook County upbringing that fosters the self-confidence and motivation to defy defeat. Page said, "To be successful in Aroostook County, you have to be resilient. You have to be creative, be prepared to learn, and have a certain humility in the face of facts." Collins said, "Aroostook County breeds in you a resilience that helps you come back when you meet an obstacle or adversity. Disappointments and setbacks are part of life. You can't let them make you give up your dream."
Wonderful. And as you pointed out at the beginning, all three were from Caribou. Is there something in the Caribou water as I watch you drink a glass of Caribou water?
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just drinking it for the courage.
Yeah, that's right. Do you, the resiliency theme obviously was expressed by all three, as well as the student who asked Jessica Meir that question. Do you see that sense of the need to be resilient, unique to Aroostook, or more prevalent in Aroostook people than other folks you've met from Maine and elsewhere? And can you ascribe any reasons why that might be?
Good question. I think all Maine people are resilient. I think there's a similarity in the fishing community, in the lumbering community, as well as in the agricultural community. I think everybody in Aroostook County will refer to the potato harvest and the traditions of hand harvesting potatoes as one example of the source of strength and a source of resilience that's developed through their childhood, and then they go on to that perpetuates and continues into adulthood.
So many people that I know, excuse me, do refer to the experience of participating in the potato harvest, and there have been, I mean, with the mechanization of potato harvesting and other changes, you know, a lot of people from the county talk about that as being something that is going to be lost on future generations, or could be. Do you see that as the glue that holds a lot of Aroostook County people together? I think when you and I were talking before, you talked about people you know who often reflect on their time or their shared experience of participating in the potato harvest. And maybe for those people who aren't familiar with it, you could talk a little bit about what the potato harvest is and how that affects the school year and other things that are taking place in the fall in the county.
Right. I think the reputation for perhaps resilience and certainly the work ethic is rooted in that hand harvest of potatoes, which is now all but disappeared in the culture up here. And I haven't done it, so I can't talk from experience, but I've talked to people who did, and they all complain about how hard it was with hard work and how terrible it was to have to get up in the morning before dawn and to layer up and get that lunch in your lunchbox and be shoved out the door onto a bus, listen to the potato picker special, and the frosty fields and the wet gloves because you picked up a rotten potato, and all of the dirt that you came home caked with, and your dirty clothes and your shoes. But in the end, you know, they're proud that they did it. And what we were talking about was I had a particular semester at Orono when I had an unusual number of Aroostook County people in the senior class. So after graduation, I invited them out for a picnic and I recorded their comments, and they all did. It evolved into discussion of the potato harvest, and they were lamenting that it no longer existed, and that Well, here's a few quotes from what they said. Kids up there are not going to have that reputation, that work ethic. They might not be as hardworking. They might not understand the value of money and what it means to work to get what you want. And just a few scattered other things that I think speak to this idea of both resiliency and hard work. One student said, county kids are special because they've had the experience of hard work. They've been initiated. When I've applied for jobs, I've had people see that I'm from the county and say, did you work on in a potato house? And when I say yes, they say, really? You must be a hard worker. I've had people say that to me. And someone else said, oh, me too. Another comment was, you take pride in your work, even if it's flipping burgers. And then they went on and reflected on some of these facts. One of them said, a lot of it is families. You appreciate the elders and you learn to respect them. Where I worked, there was usually at least one person who was another generation. Then another comment was, there were kids I never hang out with in high school, but when I'd see them, it was like we knew something of each other. The whole community comes together. You realize that's how farmers are making a living, and you have a part in that. You don't want to let them down. So my observation is it's cross-generational, it's cross-cultural, it's cross-class, and there's that sense of doing a good job matters. And that's, I think that's a lifelong lesson, and that these students were worried that the next generation wasn't going to experience it.
There's a lot of recognition of that county work ethic. I think most notably in the fact that, and I'm not sure what period it was, you probably do know, but the engineering firm based in Connecticut, Pratt and Whitney, an aviation firm, used to heavily recruit in Aroostook, and there are all kinds of folks who live in Connecticut now who trace their roots back to Aroostook County. And it was recognized as the place, if you're looking for people who could learn fast, work hard, and were reliable and honest, Aroostook County was the place to go.
That's right. And there was out migration during World War II, where they went to the aerospace industries and working with aeronautics, especially, I think, but also other places. Worcester, Massachusetts is another spot.
Yeah, very good. We have a few minutes left, and I want to encourage people, if you haven't already submitted a question for Kathy, please do so using the chat button. There's before we get to that, there's one other essay that I wanted you to read before we do some additional questions. And one is entitled The Night Sky. And anybody who spent any time in Aroostook County recognizes very quickly how different the sky is. And you were speaking about that earlier in another essay. And we haven't noted that many of these photos that we've seen were by the photographer Paul Sear, who has some brilliant photos, literally brilliant. We've seen some, and I know that we'll show some more with this particular essay. But if you would share the night sky with us, and Aisha will share some images to accompany that.
Okay, thank you for giving credit to Paul Sear. He has illustrated and very well known as up in the county for his beautiful color photography. And I begged for more color in the magazine, and we ended up with just a cover with the color. So I'm pleased that this presentation will allow more people to see more of the color photos that could have or might have illustrated True North. The first essay, or the second essay that I read alone, also contained photos. You saw photos that Paul had taken. So the night sky, and this is just a few excerpts from the essay. The Big Dipper hung low over the highway in front of me as I drove north on Interstate 95. It was one of those crisp, clear evenings when the sky turns deep blue after sunset. I couldn't wait to get to Caribou to examine the night sky from my front yard. I was not disappointed. The sky was a blanket of stars bisected by the Milky Way, a broad swath, millions of stars in an arc over my head. Every time I experience such an evening, I'm struck with wonder at the vastness of the universe and the minuteness of my place in it. I try to imagine something totally beyond my comprehension. I think about my life in a way quite different from my general focus on day-to-day activities. Observing the firmament provides a periodic perspective on existence that I find valuable. In recent years, I've come to realize that I am among a dwindling number of people on the East Coast with such a pure view of the heavens. One of the many gifts of living in northern Maine is darkness. Satellite images of the East Coast show Maine's North Woods as an island of darkness surrounded by patches of light, the largest undeveloped forest east of the Mississippi. Yet dark nights are becoming rare. A National Park Service flyer says all living things benefit from natural darkness. The night sky is everyone's heritage, but light pollution is rapidly eroding the unspoiled view of the stars. The National Geographic writer explained, darkness is as essential to our biological welfare as light itself. In a very real sense, light pollution causes us to lose sight of our true place in the universe, to forget the scale of our being, which is best measured against the dimensions of deep night with the Milky Way, the edge of the galaxy, arching overhead. The first year I lived in Aroostook County, my husband and I skied from the road to our house in the winter, crossing an open field about 1/10 of a mile. One night on one of those treks, we noticed a bright band of light directly overhead, not the stars of the Milky Way, but a solid arc. When I returned to the yard an hour or so later, the band of light had moved to the north and widened. As time passed, the glow became dancing luminescence of color that we would witness time after time thereafter, aurora borealis. I have lived in Aroostook County long enough now that I can hardly imagine the loss I would feel if I were unable to wander out into the darkness and be so small.
Beautiful, both your prose and Paul's photos, just terrific. We do one of the questions that has come in deals a little bit. Well, it goes directly back to Echoes, the magazine that you published and edited for so long. How long did was Echoes published? I know you retired from it a few years ago, but could you give us a little background, and then I'll get to the question that was provided.
Okay, yeah, we founded it in 1988, and the description that I gave you about the brochure turning into a magazine that took off. And I closed it down in 2017. So it went almost 30 years, 29 years.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Now, you had some folks, and the person who submitted the question wanted to talk about the group that helped you produce it in the Rivers Bend group.
Okay, that would have been one of our stuffers. Every 3 months, a gang of people, men and women, gathered at Rivers Bend, which is the name of my house here on the Aroostook River, to stuff the magazine. Now, stuffing involves stuffing the remittance envelope into the magazine, and then stuffing the magazine into a mailing envelope and sealing that magazine and bundling it into mail bags. So we'd have like 300 mail bags because this went all over the United States. And so these people were volunteers. They came with all of their goodies, and we had a nice lunch around the dining room table at break time. And they would work from probably 9 to noon. And we got it down to the fact that they could actually get all 2,000 magazines in the envelopes and into the mail bags before noon. That didn't happen initially, however, but I think that's what this person is saying. And we had probably a dozen and different people at each time and in and out, but it was quite a tradition. And I said, we should probably farm this out and get this done professionally so these people wouldn't have to come and work so hard. But they said, no, this is the only time that we get together. And we love this. And so they saved us tons of money by doing that, which we would have to pay decently for in order to do it commercially.
Yeah. one of the folks on the Zoom, I can see her first name is Louise, and Lucy too. It appears that they probably are veterans of that process.
Definitely, Louise is a veteran. There were a lot. Yeah, there was quite a few.
But
Thanks,
but the idea that even the publication of your magazine became a community event, and it was something that people look forward to and they celebrated and, were part of the experience. That I would assume is fairly uncommon in publishing a magazine of the nature of what you're doing, and certainly the distribution of what you had.
Well, not only the community here in Maine, but the magazine itself was a community nationwide, that people came together on the pages of Echoes through their essays and through their letters. People always said they read the letters first and then Glenna Johnson Smith's essay. And so that in effect, it did tie to people get together in a new way. And it turned out, we found that the further away people were, the more intense their feelings for the magazine. So if they didn't get it on time, we'd hear from California and Florida and New Mexico and places that, where's my Echoes?
Yeah, well, and you noted that the opportunity to purchase back issues is available. Could you talk a little bit about that? That even though Echoes is no longer in regular print, there are opportunities for people to acquire it?
Right, there we have a website, echoesofmaine.net, and on that is the our directions for ordering Echoes either through PayPal or through the mail. And I have been sending out randomly, but we get a few every so often. And the other thing I want to mention is that we're just working on a digitization of all the copies of Echoes. A woman in Orono, Melissa Garrity, is taking each page out and putting them into a digital format that will be searchable by topic, author, photograph, subject, and so forth. So that, but if people do want back issues, they are still available.
That's wonderful. And in the chat for everybody, that website that Kathy mentioned, echoesofmaine.net, is in there, and you should be able to just click on that or copy and paste it into your browser if you want to check that out. And can you talk now as we close about the book and remind people of where they can find it?
Yes, thank you. Well, ask in your local bookstore, and if they don't have it, ask them to order it from Island Port Press. And then I think that Aisha is going to post a postcard that has the website for Island Port Press, which can, and I should mention that the other book, Stories of Aroostook, is an anthology of stories from the magazine, just Echoes stories with a variety of authors. We have about 37 writers that are represented in that, in addition to True North, which is just my essays. But both of those are available from Island Port Press, and that's the site where you can find out details, as well as what Amazon and other outlets for publications.
Excellent. Well, Kathy Olmstead, thank you so much for your time today and for the wonderful stories that you have both printed and shared with us today. Very grateful for that and proud of everything you've done for the University of Maine in so many different roles. We greatly appreciate that. And thank you all for watching today. This, as we mentioned at the beginning, this presentation has been recorded and will be made available on demand at the University of Maine Alumni Association's website, its YouTube channel actually, and that information will be made available. But so please feel free to share your awareness of this with other folks. I do want to thank Aisha Veer, who is of the Alumni Association, and she's the person who coordinated and produced today's presentation. So thank you so much, Aisha, for that. And so folks, best wishes for the upcoming weekend, and for everybody who is celebrating Mother's Day, congratulations and best wishes to you. Thanks so much. Take care now.